I was on the CUSG call on September 7th, during which you made a kind of a statement about infections across or around the university throughout the term or the semester. And you put that number at about 25%. Is that an accurate representation of the current models Clemson's using?
Not really. It's probably less than that.
Okay.
The models change. And remember, a model is a theoretical projection if a whole pile of assumptions come true. And it's a theoretical construct so that we can then say, well, yeah, it could be 15, it could be 10, it could be 20, it could be 25. But what, given that number, that theoretical construct, which is not reality, now, what if we were to increase social distance to 10 feet? What if we were to have nobody in the dorms? What if we were to bring people in at different levels at the dorms? Does that number go up or down? That's what those models do. They don't really project reality. Bluntly, they kind of get you to, will you have a very little, some, or awful lot kind of in level.
Mm-hmm.
And my point that I was trying to make back then is that, am I coming across okay, or am I shaky?
No, you cut out for a second, but you're fine.
Okay. When we started modeling well before the 19th of August, our models, no matter what if this or what if that were put into it, showed a whole lot of infection, massive infection. We would overwhelm any kind of quarantining space we could put together. So as a blunt tool, that's what I meant to say. Those early models said, we're not going to be able to do this. And that's why we went to all online learning at the beginning. Since then, the infection rates in the area have been declining. There's a small blip a little while ago, but it's declining again. So it's really good news right now. And there's more data out there on testing strategies. And we began implementing different kinds of testing strategies. There's also more availability of testing options and that we could use more. And we saw that models were beginning to show at other places that very frequent and large numbers of tests help you get people who are infected identified quickly. You get them sort of isolated quickly. You can turn all those kind of bleak numbers around, and the projections now look like you can make it work.
Okay.
With reasonably small levels. When I say reasonably, what do I mean by that? Imagine what the infection rates for people who are 18 to 22 are going to be in the United States. Just pull that population out. I'm not an epidemiologist nor an expert, but I would guess that just based on how people socialize at that age, if they stayed at home in town with their previous high school friends, or they were in college with new friends, we may see some, there's going to be infection. That every population age class is being infected in the United States. And in the way that 18 to 22-year-olds socialize, and the fact that so many of them are asymptomatic. I mean, it's not evil or intent on anybody's part, but a large number of young people get sick and they don't even feel it, don't even know it. And so that group is just vulnerable to a little bit higher rate of infection anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that clarification that it's this, it's a decision-making model, and you guys are, I would assume you guys are taking all the steps to lower that, right?
Absolutely.
Throughout the semester, implementing processes and all of that. Well, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
The next thing I want to jump into is kind of these, I'll intro into this one with a brief story. So I went out and got my pilot's license last July, 2019. It's been an incredibly rewarding experience. During training, we talked about this disease that pilots get, and it's called, quote, get-home-itis. It refers to when a pilot is flying and the weather starts getting bad, and the pilot says to themselves, well, it's only 20 more miles. I'll make it home. Unfortunately, a lot of pilots lose control of the plane within weather or in the weather. So the purpose of learning about this is to know that we have to set hard weather minimums that says if the weather gets to this, we have to change course. So now I think you see where I'm going with this. You have a section in the PDF that's triggers to change course. I noticed that the only hard metric on that slide was about quarantine beds, and I'll get back to that. But does CUMPS have any other hard benchmarks in place to say if the number of active cases gets above blank, we have to change course?
Do not have a hard number, and here's why. These models require a lot of different variables that can influence it one way or another. So if you pull one of those variables out and you say, well, what if this one gets high? Then you could shut the entire university down when 3 other very influential ones are going in a great direction and your actual risk of infections are not, as high.
Okay.
So we try to, in real time, keep our eye on trends and where things are going in this multivariate environment. That said, it is clear that when we reach our quarantine capacity, trying to deliver meals will become a great challenge. And we figured that we kind of right now have the capacity to do around 650, and we've set aside 650 beds.
Yep.
And that one will catch our attention. But anytime our models begin to show us the bleak scenarios that we saw before, the models will tell us we got to take actions long before a trigger is hit.
Mm-hmm.
And so triggers are something the public can grab a hold of. And so I understand their value for people to see and understand. And we don't want to shy away from showing data and talking about if things are getting bad. But we have not set really hard.
Yeah, and
let me say another thing. This disease is so fluid and variable. A lot of universities set targets and so on and so forth, and then a while later they realize everything they assumed and everything they did in setting that is no longer in play. And now they've ratcheted themselves down, nailed themselves down to something that may be less and less important or valuable or predictive or useful.
Sure.
And now they have to break trust with the community by saying, well, that we're no longer going to pay attention to this. Then the community will say, sure, you're just changing things on your own to suit your interests and needs. So this is a delicate discussion. And the only thing we have going for us is to establish trust with our students and faculty. We hope that despite the fact that virtually no major universities of our size would declare that they were going to open up in August to start classes, mm-hmm. almost none of them decided to pause. They all went forward. We did. We made a lot of people angry. We had no trigger. We just knew from our models, this is going to be very dangerous. We just shouldn't do it. We hope people understand that cost us a lot of resources. Yeah. It caused a lot of angst in our students and our parents, political pressures, and everything else. So we want to establish we do the right thing, mm-hmm. and build that trust. And that's how we have trust with the community. It's hard to maintain that trust and keep that trust because everyone is so concerned about this pandemic. It's a pandemic.
Absolutely. And thank you for, that's a good point that, if you put that number out there and the situation is fluid, as you said, the one metric may say, well, we gotta close, and others may indicate that everything is moving as properly, right? So
yes.
You did bring up quarantine beds, and that is the metric that's in the slides, right? And it's if we've reached capacity. However, if we've reached capacity of quarantine beds, isn't it a little bit too late because we can't, or to make a change because there isn't any
yes.
more rooms left to accommodate, right?
You are right. So that's why we're watching and looking at the models and trends carefully. And if we sense there's a high likelihood this is going to be a runaway infection, we'll take steps at that point.
Okay.
Ryan,
And go ahead, Chris.
Oh, go ahead, Provost.
I was going to say, if you read our document, it also does not say that these are what we're watching and then it triggers a reaction of X, Y, or Z.
Mm-hmm.
It says that we will then begin taking steps.
Okay.
And then we list the steps that we can take, which is to reduce the amount of face-to-face interactions. And there's a little bit of evidence beginning to show that helps.
Sure.
And also, if we need to, we could depopulate the dorms, although more and more evidence is showing that's highly debatable and it may be safer or better to keep people in the dorms, which is another reason why we don't want to, hard line steps we will take, because this is so new. People are still learning and debating and getting surprised by the things you do and the impacts that they have. So this whole dorm thing, is it better to just send people out of the dorms back into the communities? And there are a lot of experts who are saying, no, that's for the public and for the United States, that's not good. It's better to try to manage in place. That's better for everybody. So we want to use, here's the bottom line. We're going to use the best science and data available to make good choices. And we'll continue to do that.
Sounds fair. Dr. Miller, did you have something that you wanted to add? I think I heard you.
Really quickly, and just as the provost said, that it's just so fluid. And one day could be very, very different than the other day. And I always reflect back on how since March, once again, we're laser focused about bringing students to campus, but all of a sudden the 4th of July hits. Yeah. And we see a significant uptick. And the thing that was compelling for me, just hearing from, and just as the provost said, these professionals, from epidemiologists to MUSC people to infectious disease people, then you have our own faculty that are really engaged in some of this research. When you hear them talking about these things, it is really amazing. So the thing that was compelling for me when we pivoted initially was ICU beds, right? I mean, people don't realize Clemson is really somewhat remote, right? So our feeder hospitals would be ANMED and also Prisma here in Oconee County. And then in Greenville, they were hovering at 85% occupancy. And the optimum occupancy is 50%. Now, that has nothing to do with our students, because when we look at the models, we keep hearing 3-4 students, right, Bob, that would actually be hospitalized if they're affected. But the issue for that is this. We bring 25,000 students here, okay? It is a relatively small city. There will be trauma. Mm-hmm. So if we're going to bring students here for other kinds of trauma, we had a student that passed away 2 weeks ago, right? And there are all kinds of other trauma, skateboard accident, whatever, right? That's a factor. It's not the factor, but it's one of the factors, right?
Sure.
That are considered. And it's the same thing with, if we think about, if we had a sudden surge and let's say 10% of our staff and faculty, 10%, I mean, if we're looking at 10% for us, from custodians to maintenance to Redfern to faculty, that would compromise us in terms of service delivery for our students, right?
Sure.
So that's another factor, right? It's not the factor, but another factor to consider. Anyway, just thought I'd throw it there.
Well, and thank you for that. And you guys both, or Provost Jones, you were talking about using the best data and science available. Dr. Miller, you were talking about the research we're doing at Clemson. So I figured I'd move into our own Dr. Friedman at Clemson University, who's been testing the wastewater at the 3 plants. He describes the testing or the wastewater testing as, quote, a canary in a coal mine. In August, he said the possibility of exponential rise in virus transmission becomes a reality when results jump into the tens of thousands of copies per liter. The most recent update from last night from the 3 plants are well above tens of thousands. In fact, the Cochrane Run plant is at 2.8 million. Campus is at 350,000 and Pendleton Clemson is at 240,000. Dr. Freeman also noted that he thinks that the indication of very active transmission, or when copies get into the millions, it's an indication of very active transmission of virus in the community. Since these results have been published, what steps has Clemson taken?
A real good one. And we have a very interesting experiment has already happened, because we began sampling on campus just to set some baselines. Mm-hmm. I think there was a mistake in one of the early samples, but we saw some of these high numbers and we thought they would start off at low. So we took, in an abundance of precaution, we went back and retested a large number of people in the Dowtha Hills dorms, because downstream of that, we had these numbers that were very high. Mm-hmm. We found virtually no spike. There's no issue. Nothing was going on. We think some athletes who were in those dorms, who were tested positive and who isolated in place because they were in single room, single bathroom places, that may have populated the wastewater in those dorms. And what we were sampling is those older things. So what does that reveal? The wastewater data and the wastewater analyses are a very, very, very immature science. There's not a lot of data out there that shows exactly what those numbers mean. Mm-hmm. It's clear that when there are high numbers, somebody's sick, right, and they're shedding virus particles. Right. And that's about all we can say now. That shook a little of our confidence, but we do believe that this is important to continue on, and we want to run it as an experiment and begin refining as best we can and calibrating these numbers so that we understand what they mean. And we will continue to see them as a canary in the mine. And if a spike occurs, we're going to start redeploying our sampling strategy and try to find out where that is. And if there's a problem, nip it in the bud, rather than just wait until all of a sudden 2 or 3 weeks later, we realize there's a giant nexus of infections that we've failed to observe. So we still think it's valuable, but its direct correlation of specific numbers to specific risks and specific numbers of people who are sick is very, very fluid right now. It's not very well nailed down.
Okay. And changing gears a little bit to masks, right? So masks have been proven as an effective way to combat COVID-19 when implemented with other measures, right? But unfortunately, not everyone was wearing masks properly or wearing the right type of masks. How are masks and other policies being enforced on campus?
Ryan, why don't I take that one on? So I think you'll see just from the messaging. And it's really interesting because I was getting an awful lot of feedback from colleagues across the country about messaging and how we would use various kinds of policies, procedures, and protocols in order to make sure that people are in compliance. As you can tell, our messaging may be different than Pitt or some of these other places, Virginia. There are a lot of others. And we take a real measured approach, and that we believe that the vast majority of our students, which is absolutely the case, and which that has not changed in any way, are going to be receptive and responsive to creating an environment that is safe and healthy, right? And the manner in which we communicate with our students, right, is one of, in my view, mutual respect, right? Mm-hmm. So what we do is provide information. And the manner in which we go about this is really not inconsistent with what we do historically and traditionally. Okay. Now, there are some things that are different. We did, in fact, amend the code to specifically include this particular component when it came to pandemic and other kinds of, and these are legal terms, acts of God and things of that nature. Sure. So we did decide to do that just for clarity and continuity, right? Now, once again, and I know because students have called and asked about it, right? Because, and let's just take last week alone, we had roughly seven parties, okay? Mm-hmm. And those parties were beyond the requisite guidelines in terms of their numbers. And then they were reported. And the police will report those too. The Clemson City Police will report those. Those individuals did, in fact, go through the Office of Community and Ethical Standards, and we used interim measures and they were suspended immediately. Now,
Okay.
you're probably saying, well, why would we? Well, there's a reason for that, right? We know in order for us to get a handle on this and to minimize the spread of the virus, these are the things that have to happen. And that does, in fact, compromise the greater community. So when there is a risk, and there's a known risk, and that people will fully engage in behavior, which is egregious, and we believe that that would be when we talk about those size of gatherings, right? They get a hearing, right, within the first 24 hours, and then there'll be a determination as to how they would proceed after that. That is not inconsistent with what we have done and what we will continue to do, right? I know some students were really concerned about the city issuing citations, and they find another citation by way of the university, which is consistent with the Tiger Steps piece, right? Mm-hmm. That's not inconsistent with what we do as well. So the code is specifically designed, right? It is educationally based, but also designed in such a way that we will address those issues, and we do it in a way that is deliberate, right, and efficient. So that method of enforcement, once again, is clearly consistent with things that we've always done in the past. But make no mistake about it, we're going to be pretty assertive about making sure that the collective campus is going to be safe. Now, saying that, Ryan, as I said before, the vast majority, 98% of our student communities are actively engaged and are a active participant in our efforts to abate the spread of the virus.
Sure.
So it may have a little bit more in terms of notoriety, because I know Greenville News picked it up and some others may have picked it up as well. But as I said before, it is not inconsistent with what we do. And it is an effective means of enforcement. And you're not going to believe this, but the vast majority of reports that we get by way of incident reports are coming from other students.
Sure.
So it's
that's referring to gatherings, right, or parties, correct?
Right.
So I was more talking, and thank you for that clarification and talking about the code of conduct and the amendment. I was more talking about, like, maybe you're walking around campus, or maybe you're in a classroom or in a building, and you kind of notice someone without a mask on. Now, I'm not going to call Dr. Miller up and say we got to there's a code of conduct violation, right? But there is like this. There's a lot of messaging about Tigers together and holding each other accountable, right?
Right.
Now, I'm someone that takes the CDC guidelines and all other expert guidelines pretty seriously. And when I'm in a position of power, like at Tigervision, I have no problem telling a member to mask up.
Right.
There is this awkwardness, right? When I see a peer, am I going to yell from the bottom floor of the business college up to the third floor to say, hey, put a mask on? And I have seen it, but I'm not, I don't know if it's my place. So how should we combat this awkwardness to speak up?
Well, I think it's more about social norming, and I kind of view this the very same way. Now, this is before your time, but at one point in time, there was smoking on campus. I know it's hard to believe, but Bob knows, everybody's out smoking. They're doing all kinds of things. We did not have a smoke police. Now, let me ask you, Ryan, how many times, are you a senior?
Yeah, I'm a senior.
How many times have you seen people smoking outright on campus?
Only a few professors with these types of hats on, but that's about it.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's all about the social norming pieces, right? You don't necessarily need those, because people like you and others that are engaged in creating an environment, right, that is conducive in terms of minimizing the spread of the virus. There are some of you that feel much, much more careful about reporting an incident where individuals are not, they don't have face coverings, and some do. Now, some of those things that we can certainly investigate, right? Some we can't. Mm-hmm. But it's like anything else in that sense. It's more about the community that's taking the response and taking the lead, and in fact, letting us know. And we've had that. We've had citations. We've had individuals that have been, well, the police do it, because they do citations, but city police, not campus police.
Sure.
So we have had incident reports that come in where people are not doing it. It's a level 2 sanction that goes with it. It's not level 1. But still, well, if it's consistent, then it becomes a level 1 piece. But you would be surprised at the number of people that are, in my view, socially responsible that are going to let us know if there is egregious behavior by way of face coverings.
Sure. And since we're on the topic, I'll just jump in it. So that a little bit about like approved face coverings, right? So on Clemson's website, they talk about approved face coverings. I mean, like this mask, it's a vented mask. That's a no, right? And I don't know if it's on your website, but I know that there's been certain studies about those fishing gaiters, the ones that you pull up, about that those may be actually worse than not wearing a mask. At least there was a Duke study that had preliminary findings about that. How is Clemson enforcing not only people wearing masks, but also the right type of mask?
I can jump in here a little bit. One thing that we're doing right now is drafting up all of the health and safety directives into one document, because what we've done is we promulgated little bits and pieces and posted them on webs, and they're all over the place. And now's the time for us to answer questions exactly like that, Ryan, and get them all and the next level of clarity and all in one document with clear wording, because these are things that aren't just concerns that a student has about, what's approved, what's not. How do we get each other to wear masks? It's happening in the employees too.
Yeah.
In fact, there's some employees looking at ambiguity in some of the wording on one website, pointing to it and saying, well, this means that I can go without a mask just because of a grammatical nuance. So we have some clarity to do, and we have expectations and social norming for our employees too. And I'm making a note of your question about mask types because I'm helping to review those documents. I'll make sure that those are very clear in that as well. The latest advice is put in there. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, thank you. And I look forward to when that document gets put out. I think we're right about at time, and I don't want to keep you guys. I know you probably got other meetings to get to. And thank you so much for stopping by, for joining the Zoom call. It was great to have you here as well, Dr. Miller, and the clarity that you guys provide.
Ryan, thank you for all the work you're doing.